Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I want to start by thanking the member for Warringah for bringing these amendments and for continuing to fight to hold this government to account for what it is and is not doing, and ultimately for doing everything she can to ensure that we are focused on increasing both integrity across our society whilst also advocating we do all we can to address the very real and current impacts of climate change on our environment, our society and our economy. For you see, in the first instance, this legislation seeks to ensure the abuse of confidential information shared by the Commonwealth with those outside is made as difficult as possible, and that those who abuse that privilege face appropriate consequences. These reforms are to be welcomed, and indeed my community of North Sydney is happy to see them come in. But this good legislation reform is then used as a fake pass, for want of a better analogy, which then sees this government introduce reform to the petroleum rent resources tax. And this is where I'd like to focus the rest of my time. The petroleum rent resources tax, or as Australians know it, the PRRT, is broken. It's a system of taxing resources which was built for a different time and a different asset class. And yet here is this government trying, as my grandmother would have said, to put lipstick on a pig, offering this reform up to Australians as both appropriate and enough. Well, it's not enough. And this proposed legislative change does not only not come anywhere close to inspiring confidence in this government's approach, it should actually be offensive to all Australians, not the least being future generations. Others have worked out how they can both transition their own economy while supporting other nations on their road to change through the reliable supply of the resources they need. And we need look no further than the Scandinavian countries for examples on how to do this well. In particular, in Norway, they've figured out how to extract revenue from their natural resources whilst also building an extraordinary sovereign wealth fund, which will ensure that not only those who are reaping the immediate profits benefit, but that future generations will have the capital they are likely to need to navigate the pressing social issues of their time. With that precedent right in front of us then, why would we not choose to emulate it? Foreign multinational companies are currently reaping the profits from the sales of our limited natural resources. And it is not unreasonable for Australians to expect that they pay a premium for access to these limited and rapidly depleting, extremely valuable products. These companies are not doing us a favour by extracting our resources. So why is it that successive governments have continued to behave like apologists when it comes to placing real value on what is rightly ours? I am all for being a reliable trading partner, but in this instance, I would rather be the David Jones food hall than Aldi. Inflated deductions too quickly, which is the end result of this legislation, sees Australians receive little in return for their natural resources. And it's not just now, Deputy Speaker. This is little in return for our natural resources decades upon decades upon decades. In fact, the government's latest budget papers show that this government will make more money off smokers with a tobacco tax of $3.3 billion over 4 years than it will make from extracting our limited gas resources, which will only return, through the PRRT, $2.4 billion. I'll just repeat that. The government will make $3.3 billion on tobacco and only $2.4 billion on extracted gas resources. Now, I'm not an economist, but I've run plenty of businesses, and that doesn't sound like a great business dynamic to me. While I've spent most of my time speaking on the PRRT reforms proposed in this legislation, the truth is, as I've said before, these reforms are tacked onto the end of a bill that actually leads with reforming tax laws to crack down on tax practitioner misconduct. And this is of itself an important discussion for us to have as both a society and a parliament. But as a consequence, what we have in this piece of legislation is two very important topics rolled into one. And the question must be asked, in what world does it make sense to lump these two things together in one piece of legislation? Well, I'll tell you where it makes sense. In a world where tricky politicking and wedge politics has taken precedence over good policy. No wonder public trust in both our government and individual politicians has eroded so significantly in the last decade. What's next? Will this government's delayed fuel efficiency legislation be bundled in with housing reform? Must we scan the education bills for traces of changes to the Migration Act? Let's be really clear about what this legislation is. This government knows it has passed up the opportunity for fundamental reform of our resource taxation system, selling Australians short and caving into the gas industry. And to cover it up, it has bundled that missed opportunity into a bill to crack down on tax advisor misconduct, catalysed by the PwC scandal. It is a sweet treat with a rotten centre. Australians deserve better. They deserve a fair share of their resources. They deserve good policy practice. And this bill provides neither of those things. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.